If someone had told me a year ago that Ashley would betray me, I would have laughed in their face. We were that couple, the ones people envied at dinner parties. 15 years of marriage, a nice house in the suburbs, 2 cars in the driveway, and a golden retriever named Max who thought we were the center of his universe. But sometimes, the foundation starts to crack before you even realize there's a problem. It started small, like most things do. Ashley used to be all about us. Sunday morning pancakes, binge-watching those cheesy crime shows, or just sitting on the porch with a glass of wine, talking about everything and nothing. But lately, she'd been distant. Her phone never left her hand, and when I asked who she was texting, it was always the same, just Sarah, or, it's work stuff, you wouldn't get it. I chalked it up to stress. Ashley worked in marketing, and I knew deadlines could be brutal. But then there were the late-night gym sessions. Ashley had never been a fitness nut. In fact, she hated the gym. But now, she was hitting it almost every evening, coming home flushed and energized, claiming she was trying to get back in shape. At first, I admired her dedication. But then, there was the night I hugged her after she walked through the door, and I smelled it, that faint, lingering scent of cheap cologne. It wasn't mine. I hadn't worn cologne in years. I pulled back, gave her a questioning look, but she just laughed it off, saying, "Oh, some kid bumped into me at the gym. Must have rubbed off." It seemed harmless enough. But something didn't sit right. It wasn't just the smell, it was the way her eyes darted when she said it, the quick change of subject, and the sudden rush to the shower. That night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, a knot of suspicion tightened in my chest. I didn't want to believe it. I couldn't believe it. But deep down, I knew something was wrong. I just didn't know how wrong it was going to get. The next morning felt like any other, at least on the surface. Ashley was in the kitchen making coffee, humming some random pop song, acting like nothing was out of the ordinary. But that knot in my chest? It hadn't gone anywhere. If anything, it was tighter. I watched her from the doorway, wondering if I was just overthinking. Maybe I was being paranoid. I mean, who starts doubting their wife of 15 years over a weird smell and a few late nights at the gym? But the thing about suspicion is, once it creeps in, it doesn't just disappear. It grows, festers, until you have to know the truth. That afternoon, Ashley left her phone on the counter when she went upstairs to shower. She never did that. Ever. It was like that thing was glued to her hand lately. I stared at it for a good minute, my heart pounding like I was about to defuse a bomb. I didn't want to be that guy, the one who snoops through his wife's phone. But the curiosity was eating me alive. So, against every instinct I had about trust and privacy, I picked it up. Her phone wasn't locked. She must have trusted me enough to think I wouldn't look. I wish I hadn't. There were texts. Dozens of them. But not from Brittany or Sarah like she'd claimed. No, these were from someone named Tyler. At first, I thought it was just a friend from work or the gym. But then I started reading. Can't stop thinking about last night. When can I see you again? My parents are out this weekend. You drive me crazy, you know that? I froze. My hands went cold, and my mouth felt like sandpaper. I scrolled further, and that's when I saw the photos, nothing explicit, but enough to make my stomach turn. Selfies of Ashley in her gym clothes, biting her lip, posing in ways she never did for me anymore. And there was Tyler, a scrawny, baby-faced kid who couldn't have been more than 17 or 18, flexing like he was some kind of stud. I dropped the phone on the counter like it had burned me. This wasn't just some innocent flirtation. This was real. She was having an affair. With a teenager. I sat down at the kitchen table, staring at nothing, my mind racing. My wife, my Ashley, was sneaking around with some high school kid. How long had this been going on? Was this the real reason for the late-night gym trips? How could I have been so blind? The front door slammed shut, snapping me out of my thoughts. Ashley had finished her shower and was already grabbing her keys. "Hey, I'm heading out to meet Sarah for lunch," she said, smiling like everything was fine. That I just stared at her, my heart pounding in my ears. Something wrong? She asked, tilting her head like she actually cared. That I forced a smile, my mind screaming. No. Nothing's wrong. But everything was wrong. And I had no idea how I was going to handle it. That I watched Ashley walk out the door like nothing had happened, her purse swinging off her shoulder, car keys jingling in her hand. The sound of the door clicking shut echoed in my head, like a final nail being hammered into the coffin of our marriage. I sat there for what felt like hours, staring at the phone still sitting on the counter. Tyler. The name burned into my brain like a brand. I couldn't shake the image of his smug teenage face, the cocky text messages, the stupid flexing pictures. My wife was sneaking around with some punk who probably had algebra homework. That I knew I had to confront her. But how? I couldn't just blurt it out. I needed to be sure. I needed more proof. I needed to catch her. So, I made a plan. That evening, Ashley came home all smiles, like she hadn't just spent the afternoon lying to my face. She plopped down on the couch next to me, scrolling through her phone like nothing was out of the ordinary. I pretended everything was normal too, asking her about lunch with Sarah and nodding along as she fed me more lies, but inside? I was boiling. The next few days were a blur of pretending. I watched her like a hawk, noting every excuse, every trip to the gym, every work meeting that suddenly popped up. And each time, I felt the weight of those texts, those photos, pressing down harder. Finally, the opportunity came. One Thursday night, Ashley said she was going to the gym again. I played it cool, gave her a kiss on the cheek, and watched her drive off. But this time, I followed her. She didn't go to the gym. Instead, she drove across town, pulling into a neighborhood I didn't recognize. I kept my distance, heart pounding in my chest. She parked in front of a small house, one of those cookie-cutter homes with peeling paint and an overgrown lawn, and then I saw him, Tyler. He came out of the house, grinning like he'd just won the lottery. Ashley got out of the car, and before I could even process what I was seeing, they were in each other's arms. Kissing. Laughing. That I felt like the ground had been ripped out from under me. They disappeared into the house, and I just sat there in my car, staring at the front door, fists clenched so tight my knuckles turned white. The betrayal was no longer just texts and suspicions. It was real, right there in front of me. I didn't go home that night. That I drove around for hours, trying to make sense of everything. How did we get here? How did she get here? What did this kid have that I didn't? By the time I pulled into our driveway, the sun was already creeping over the horizon. Ashley's car was parked where it always was, like nothing had happened. But everything had, and I knew I couldn't pretend anymore. The house was silent when I stepped inside, except for the faint hum of the refrigerator. Max, our golden retriever, trotted over, tail wagging, oblivious to the storm brewing inside me. I gave him a quick scratch behind the ears, trying to steady my breathing. Ashley was upstairs. I could hear the faint creak of the floorboards as she moved around, probably getting ready for bed after a night of whatever with Tyler. My stomach twisted. The betrayal felt heavier now, like a physical weight pressing down on my chest. But the shock was gone. Now, it was just anger. I didn't even think about what I'd say. I just knew I had to say something. That I climbed the stairs slowly, each step feeling like a countdown. When I pushed open the bedroom door, she was sitting at her vanity, brushing her hair, wearing the old t-shirt of mine she always said was her favorite. The sight of her acting like everything was normal nearly pushed me over the edge. She glanced at me in the mirror, offering a tired smile. "Hey, you're up late. Couldn't sleep?" I stood there for a moment, just staring at her, wondering how someone could lie so easily, so effortlessly. Then I pulled out my phone, opened the messages I had found, and tossed it onto the bed. Her eyes flicked to the screen, and for a split second, her face froze. Just enough for me to see the truth. But then, like flipping a switch, she was back to normal, calm, collected, as if I was the one overreacting. "What's this?" she asked, setting the brush down like we were about to have a casual conversation. "Don't play dumb, Ashley," I snapped, my voice sharper than I intended. I know. I followed you. I saw you with him. The room fell silent. The kind of silence that feels heavy, like the air itself doesn't want to move. Finally, she sighed, rolling her eyes like I had just accused her of leaving the milk out. You're being ridiculous, Jake. Ridiculous? I nearly laughed, the disbelief mixing with the anger boiling in my chest. I saw you with that kid. Tyler. Don't lie to me. Her face hardened. He's not a kid, Jake. He's 18. Like that made it better that I stared at her, feeling like I didn't even recognize the woman in front of me. 18? Are you serious right now? You're 37, Ashley. You're old enough to be his. Don't you dare, she cut me off, her voice cold and sharp. Don't you dare make this about age. You don't get it. You've been so checked out for years, Jake. I needed something. Someone who actually made me feel alive again. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. Checked out? I've been here, Ashley. I've been trying. You're the one who pulled away. You're the one who lied. She stood up then, crossing her arms, her eyes narrowing. And what? You think you're perfect? You think just because you're here physically that it means you're really here? You've been coasting through this marriage like it's some chore. Tyler, he listens to me. He sees me. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. She was standing there, justifying everything like it was my fault. Like I had somehow pushed her into the arms of a teenager. That I shook my head, my hands clenching into fists at my sides. You've got to be kidding me. You threw away 15 years for some kid who probably still lives with his parents? Her eyes flashed with anger, but she didn't respond. Instead, she turned away, grabbing her phone off the bed. I don't have to explain myself to you, Jake. Maybe if you had been paying attention, this wouldn't have happened. That was it. The final straw. That I felt something snap inside me. Not just anger, clarity. I realized in that moment that the woman standing in front of me wasn't the same woman I had married. Maybe she hadn't been for a long time. That I took a deep breath, forcing the words out slowly, deliberately. We're done, Ashley. I want you out of this house. She spun around, her mouth dropping open. You're kicking me out? I nodded, my voice steady now. Yeah. You can go stay with Tyler if he's so great. For the first time, I saw a flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. But she covered it up quickly, grabbing her bag and storming out of the room. I listened as she stomped down the stairs, slamming the front door behind her, and just like that, she was gone. That I stood there for a long time, staring at the empty doorway, letting the silence settle over me. The anger, the betrayal, it was all still there. But underneath it, something else was starting to grow, relief, because as much as it hurt, I knew I deserved better than this. The house felt different after Ashley left, too quiet, too still, like the walls themselves were trying to adjust to her absence. I stood in the middle of our bedroom, the air thick with the echoes of our argument, and for the first time in years, I didn't know what to do. Max padded into the room, his tail wagging slightly as he looked up at me, oblivious to the chaos that had just unfolded. I knelt down, running my fingers through his fur, grounding myself in the simplicity of his presence. He didn't care about lies or betrayal. He was just there, loyal as ever, but I wasn't sure how to be loyal to myself anymore. The next morning hit me like a freight train. I woke up expecting to hear Ashley in the kitchen, the clatter of dishes, the scent of her coffee brewing, but there was nothing. Just the oppressive silence and the heavy weight of reality pressing down on me. That I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the cup of coffee I'd made out of habit. It tasted bitter, but I wasn't sure if that was the coffee or just the bitterness in me. Her side of the bed was still messy, the imprint of her body in the sheets like a ghost I couldn't shake. I tried to clean it up, to erase any sign of her, but it felt like trying to scrub out a stain that had soaked too deep. I thought I'd feel relief after kicking her out, and maybe a part of me did. But the other part? The part that had built 15 years of memories with her? That part felt hollow. The worst part wasn't even the betrayal itself. It was the realization that I hadn't seen it coming. How many nights had I sat across from her at the dinner table, talking about our day, completely oblivious to the fact that she was slipping away from me? How many times had I kissed her goodnight, thinking everything was fine, while she was sneaking around with Tyler that I couldn't get his stupid face out of my head. The smug texts, the flexing photos. The idea of my Ashley being with him made my skin crawl. It wasn't just the cheating. It was who she cheated with. A kid who probably didn't even know how to do his own taxes. I tried to distract myself. I went to work, but I couldn't focus. Every email felt pointless. Every meeting dragged on like torture. My coworkers noticed, of course. Greg from accounting gave me that awkward, "You good, man?" look in the break room. I just nodded and muttered something about being tired, but it wasn't just tired. It was like my entire life had been turned inside out, and I didn't know how to flip it back. When I got home that night, the house felt even emptier. I wandered through the rooms, staring at the photos on the walls, smiling pictures of us from vacations, birthdays, anniversaries. They felt like someone else's memories now. Like I was looking at a life I didn't recognize. That I finally ended up in the garage, rummaging through old boxes just to keep my hands busy. That's when I found an old photo album from when we first got married. I sat down on the cold concrete floor, flipping through page after page of our early days, our honeymoon in Hawaii, our first Christmas together, the day we brought Max home. That we looked happy. Really happy. And maybe we were, back then. But somewhere along the line, we lost that. Or maybe she lost it. Maybe I was just too blind to see it slipping away. I closed the album, shoved it back in the box, and sat there in the silence, letting the weight of it all settle in. This wasn't just about Ashley cheating. It was about realizing that the life I thought I had wasn't real anymore. And maybe it hadn't been for a long time, but now, it was time to figure out what was real. And what came next. The first weekend without Ashley was the hardest. I thought I'd feel some sense of freedom, like a weight had been lifted, but instead, it felt like I was walking through fog. Every corner of the house reminded me of her. The empty spot on the bathroom sink where her makeup bag used to be, the half-finished bottle of her shampoo in the shower, the faint smell of her perfume lingering on the couch. It was everywhere. I found myself doing stupid things, like setting 2 plates at dinner out of habit, or reaching for my phone to text her about something trivial before reality slammed into me like a brick wall. She wasn't here. She wasn't coming back. And even if she did, I wouldn't want her to, but that didn't stop my mind from replaying every moment, every conversation, every missed sign. I kept asking myself the same questions over and over. How did I not see this coming? Was I really that blind? Was it something I did or didn't do? I tried calling my friend Mike. He'd been my best friend since college, the guy who always knew what to say, the one who stood beside me at my wedding. But when I heard his voice on the other end of the line, I froze. "Hey man, what's up?" he said, casual as ever. I opened my mouth to respond, but the words caught in my throat. How was I supposed to tell him that my wife had been cheating on me with a teenager? It sounded ridiculous, even in my head. I ended up mumbling something about being busy and hung up before he could ask more questions. I wasn't ready to talk about it. Not yet. That night, I sat on the porch with a beer in my hand, staring out at the quiet street. Max lay at my feet, his head resting on his paws, sensing the shift in the air but not understanding it. I envied him. Dogs don't care about betrayal or broken promises. They just love you, no questions asked. As I sat there, the memories started to creep in, the good ones, the ones that hurt the most. Our first date at that little Italian restaurant downtown, the night we danced in the living room to some cheesy 80s song, the day we bought this house and painted the walls together, arguing over which shade of blue was actually blue, and then, just like that, those good memories were tainted by the image of her and Tyler. I couldn't separate them anymore. The woman I had built a life with wasn't the same woman sneaking around behind my back, lying to my face, and laughing in the arms of a kid who probably still had a curfew. The next morning, I woke up to a text from an unknown number. My heart pounded in my chest as I opened it. "We need to talk. Can we meet?" Ashley. I stared at the message, my thumb hovering over the screen. What did she want now? An explanation? An apology? Closure. I didn't owe her anything. But curiosity, or maybe some twisted need for answers, got the better of me. I replied with a simple, "Where and when?" She suggested a cafe downtown, the one we used to go to on Sunday mornings. The irony wasn't lost on me. When I walked into the cafe later that afternoon, I spotted her immediately. She was sitting at a corner table, her hair pulled back in that effortless way I used to love, wearing the same jacket I bought her for our anniversary last year. She looked up as I approached, her eyes searching mine for something regret, maybe, or guilt, but I didn't see it. I sat down across from her, folding my arms, waiting for her to speak. She fiddled with her coffee cup for a moment, avoiding my gaze. "Jake, I cut her off, my voice colder than I expected. "Just get to the point." She looked up then, and for a brief second, I thought I saw a flicker of the woman I used to know. But it was gone just as quickly. "I didn't mean for it to happen like this," she started, her voice soft, rehearsed. "It wasn't about him, Jake. It was about me. I felt lost. I needed something different." I let out a bitter laugh, shaking my head. "Different? So, you ran off with a kid barely out of high school?" She flinched at that, but I didn't care. She deserved to feel uncomfortable. "I'm not proud of what I did," she continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "But you have to understand. I felt invisible with you. Like we were just going through the motions." I clenched my jaw, trying to keep my anger in check. "You could have talked to me, Ashley. You could have said something. But instead, you lied. You cheated. You didn't just hurt me, you destroyed everything we built." She looked down at her coffee, silent. For the first time, she didn't have an excuse. After a long pause, she finally spoke. "I'm sorry, Jake. I really am. But it didn't matter." The words felt hollow, meaningless. No apology could fix what she had done. That I stood up, grabbing my jacket. "Keep your apology. I don't need it." As I walked out of the cafe, I felt a strange mix of emotions: anger, sadness, betrayal. But beneath all that, there was something else. Something I hadn't felt in a long time: freedom. Ashley was part of my past now. And as much as it hurt, it was time to start thinking about my future. Walking out of that cafe felt like stepping into a new world. The sun was bright, the air crisp, and for the first time in weeks, I felt like I could actually breathe. The weight of Ashley's betrayal was still there, lingering in the background like a dull ache, but something had shifted. That I was done trying to figure out why she did it, done replaying every moment of our marriage in my head, trying to pinpoint the exact second things went wrong. I knew the answers didn't matter anymore. What mattered was what I did next. But moving on is easier said than done. The first few days after that meeting were a blur. I threw myself into work, staying late at the office just to avoid coming home to the empty house. Even Max seemed to feel the difference. He followed me from room to room, his big brown eyes full of questions he couldn't ask. I tried to keep things normal for him: long walks in the evenings, his favorite treats, belly rubs, but it wasn't the same. It felt like we were both trying to adjust to a new reality. The nights were the hardest. That was when the silence felt the loudest. I'd lie in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the faint creaks of the house settling around me. My mind would drift back to Ashley, her laugh, the way she used to curl up next to me, her head resting on my chest. It was like my brain couldn't let go of the good memories, no matter how hard I tried to focus on the bad. One night, I finally broke down and called Mike. He answered on the second ring. "Jake? You good, man?" I took a deep breath, feeling the lump in my throat. "No. Not really. That was all it took. I didn't even have to explain. Mike just listened as I unloaded everything: the affair, Tyler, the confrontation, all of it. There was a long silence when I finished, and for a second, I thought maybe he didn't know what to say. Then he spoke. "Jake, you're coming over. Now. I've got beer, and you're not sitting in that house alone." I wanted to argue, tell him I was fine, but the truth was, I wasn't. So, I grabbed my keys and headed to his place. Mike lived in the same neighborhood we'd all grown up in, just a few streets over from where Ashley and I bought our first house. Pulling into his driveway felt like stepping back in time, like I was 18 again, showing up to hang out after a bad day. He greeted me at the door with a cold beer and a slap on the back. "Come on, man. Let's get you out of that headspace." We spent the night like we used to, talking about everything and nothing. Sports, old college stories, even the dumb stuff we used to do as kids. For the first time in weeks, I laughed. Really laughed. It felt good. Normal. But eventually, the conversation circled back to Ashley. "You know," Mike said, leaning back in his chair, "I always thought she was a little off." I raised an eyebrow. "Off? You never said anything." He shrugged. "Didn't think it was my place. You seemed happy." "But yeah, man, something about her always felt like she was holding back, you know?" I thought about that. Maybe Mike had seen something I hadn't. Or maybe I just didn't want to see it. Either way, it didn't matter now. "What do I even do from here?" I asked, voicing the question that had been gnawing at me since the day Ashley left. Mike didn't hesitate. "You live, man. You pick yourself up, you move forward. She's not the end of your story." I nodded, letting his words sink in. He was right. Ashley wasn't the end. She was just a chapter, a painful one, but not the whole story. When I got home that night, the house felt different. Still empty, still quiet, but not suffocating. I realized then that I didn't have to fill the silence with memories of her. I could create new ones. Ones that didn't include Ashley or the mess she left behind. The next morning, I started small. I cleaned out the closet, packed up the last of her stuff, and dropped it off at her sister's house. I deleted her number from my phone. I even took down the photos from the walls, replacing them with prints I'd always wanted to hang but never did because Ashley didn't like them. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Every day got a little easier. The anger faded, the sadness dulled, and slowly, I began to feel like myself again. Not the old me, the one who had been blind to what was happening, but a new version. Stronger. Wiser, and maybe, just maybe, ready to see what the future had in store. A few weeks passed, and life started to settle into a new rhythm. The weight of Ashley's betrayal still lingered, but it wasn't suffocating me anymore. I focused on small victories: getting up without feeling that hollow pit in my chest, going to work without zoning out every 5 minutes, and even laughing with Mike without forcing it. But just when I thought I was getting back on track, something unexpected happened. It was a Saturday morning, and I was out for a walk with Max at the park near my house. The sun was shining, and the air had that crisp bite of early fall. Max trotted ahead, his nose buried in every patch of grass, his tail wagging like nothing in the world could go wrong. That's when I saw her. At first, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. But as I got closer, there was no mistaking her. Samantha. Samantha wasn't just anyone. She was the ex. The one before Ashley. The one I'd almost proposed to before life took us in different directions. We hadn't spoken in over 16 years. Seeing her now felt like the universe had decided to throw me a curveball. She was sitting on a bench, sipping coffee, her eyes glued to her phone. She looked almost exactly the same bright green eyes, same easy smile that used to light up a room. But there was something different too. A calmness. A confidence. Max, oblivious to my internal freak-out, bounded straight toward her, tail wagging like he'd known her all his life. She looked up, surprised, and then her eyes met mine. For a second, neither of us said anything. Then, she laughed softly, that familiar sound hitting me like a punch and a warm hug all at once. "Jake," she said, standing up. "Wow. It's been, what, forever?" "Yeah," I managed to say, trying to keep my voice steady. "Forever sounds about right." She knelt down to scratch Max behind the ears, and he melted into her touch like he'd found his new best friend. "Typical." "So," she said, standing back up, "what brings you here?" "I thought you moved out of this neighborhood." I shrugged, stuffing my hands in my pockets. "I did. Bought a house nearby with was married. But, not anymore." Her eyebrows lifted slightly, but she didn't press. "I'm sorry to hear that." "Yeah, well," I trailed off, not sure what else to say. That we stood there in awkward silence for a moment, and I was about to make some excuse to leave when she surprised me. "Listen," she said, her smile softening. "I'm meeting some friends for brunch, but, would you want to catch up sometime? I'd love to hear more about everything." I blinked, caught off guard. The last thing I expected when I left the house that morning was to run into her. But there was something about the way she asked. No pressure, no expectations. Just genuine curiosity. "Yeah," I found myself saying. "I'd like that." We exchanged numbers, and as she walked away, I stood there for a moment, watching her disappear into the crowd. It felt surreal, like some weird twist of fate I wasn't sure how to process. But the surprises weren't over. When I got home, there was an envelope on my doorstep. No return address, just my name scrawled across the front in handwriting I recognized immediately. "Ashley." I stared at it for a long time, debating whether to even open it. Part of me wanted to toss it straight into the trash. But curiosity got the better of me. I tore it open and pulled out a single sheet of paper. "Jake, I know you don't want to hear from me, but there are things you don't know. Things I couldn't say that night at the cafe. I need to tell you the truth, not about Tyler, but about us. Please, meet me at the old cabin. You'll understand everything then. Ashley." The old cabin.it was a place we used to go when we wanted to escape the world. A tiny, run-down cabin in the woods about an hour out of town. We hadn't been there in years, not since before things started to fall apart. I read the note twice, my mind racing. What truth? What could she possibly have to say that I didn't already know? I'd made my peace with her betrayal, or at least, I thought I had. But now, this letter had stirred something up. Something I wasn't ready to face. Was this just another one of her games? Or was there really something I didn't know? I tossed the letter on the counter, trying to shake it off, but it gnawed at me all day. By the time evening rolled around, I found myself staring at my car keys, the decision weighing heavy in my chest. Did I really want to open that door again? Or was it better to leave the past where it belonged? But curiosity is a powerful thing. And sometimes, no matter how much you want to move forward, the past has a way of pulling you back. By the time I finally decided to drive to the cabin, the sun was dipping below the horizon, casting long shadows across the road. The familiar stretch of highway felt different now, like it belonged to another life. The trees on either side grew denser as I got closer, their twisted branches clawing at the sky. The further I drove, the tighter the knot in my chest grew. What am I doing? I kept asking myself. I could have ignored the letter, pretended it didn't exist. But something about Ashley's words had burrowed into my mind. Things you don't know. What could possibly be worse than what I already knew? The gravel crackled under my tires as I pulled up to the old cabin. It looked the same as it always had: weathered wood, a sagging porch, and the faint scent of pine in the air. This place had once been a sanctuary for us. Now, it felt like a crime scene. Ashley's car was already there. I killed the engine and sat in the silence for a moment, staring at the faint glow of light seeping through the cabin windows. My heart pounded in my chest, a mix of anger, anxiety, and something else I couldn't quite name. I got out of the car, Max following close behind. His ears perked up, sensing my tension, but he stayed by my side as I approached the door. I knocked once, sharply. A few seconds passed before the door creaked open. Ashley stood there, looking different. Her hair was pulled back, her face bare of makeup, and there was a heaviness in her eyes that hadn't been there before. She wasn't wearing her usual polished look. Instead, she had on an old hoodie and jeans, like she was trying to shed the person she'd become. "Jake," she said quietly, stepping aside to let me in. I hesitated for a second, then crossed the threshold, Max trotting in beside me. The cabin was dimly lit, the faint scent of the wood burning in the old fireplace mixing with the crisp night air. It was eerily quiet, save for the occasional pop from the fire. Ashley motioned for me to sit at the old table where we'd shared countless meals and conversations back when things were good. I sat down, my arms crossed, waiting. She didn't sit. Instead, she paced the room, her hands fidgeting like she didn't know where to start. The silence stretched between us, thick and uncomfortable. "All right, Ashley," I finally snapped, breaking the tension. "I'm here. What's this big truth you dragged me out here for?" She stopped pacing, her eyes meeting mine. There was something raw in her gaze, fear, maybe. Or guilt. Probably both. "It wasn't just Tyler," she said quietly. I scoffed. "Yeah, no kidding." She shook her head, biting her lip. "No, I mean, Tyler wasn't the first." The words hit me like a slap. I felt the blood drain from my face as I stared at her, trying to process what she'd just said. "What?" I whispered, my voice low and dangerous. She took a shaky breath, finally sitting across from me. "It started a year ago. I didn't plan for it to happen. I felt so lost, Jake. We weren't connecting anymore. You were always distant, always at work, and don't you dare blame this on me," I snapped, slamming my hand on the table. Max flinched at my side, but I barely noticed. "You could have talked to me. You could have tried. But you didn't. You went behind my back." Tears welled up in her eyes, but I wasn't falling for that act anymore. "I know," she whispered. "I know I messed up. But it wasn't just about cheating. There's more." I glared at her, my patience wearing thin. "Spit it out, Ashley." She looked down at her hands, her voice barely audible. I think Tyler might be dangerous." I blinked, thrown off by the sudden shift. "What are you talking about?" Her eyes flicked up to meet mine, filled with something I hadn't seen before. "Fear. Real, bone-deep fear. After you confronted me," she whispered, "I tried to break things off with him. I thought it was just some fling, but he didn't take it well. He started showing up at my work. Calling me at all hours. And last night," she trailed off, her hands trembling. "Last night, he was outside my apartment. Just standing there, staring up at my window." I felt a chill run down my spine, the anger momentarily giving way to something else. Suspicion. Unease. "And you're telling me this why?" I asked, my voice cold. "Because I don't know what he's capable of, Jake," she whispered. "And I don't know if he'll come after you too." For a moment, the room was dead silent. I stared at her, trying to figure out if this was another one of her manipulations. But the fear in her eyes, it felt real. Before I could respond, there was a sudden, sharp knock at the door. We both froze. Max's ears perked up, a low growl rumbling in his throat. Ashley's face went pale. "Jake," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I didn't tell anyone we were meeting here." The knock came again, louder this time, more insistent. I stood up slowly, my heart pounding in my chest. Whoever was on the other side of that door wasn't just here for a friendly visit, and in that moment, I realized Ashley's betrayal might have been just the beginning of something much darker. It's been 6 months since that night at the cabin, but the events still play in my mind like a movie I can't turn off. I can remember every detail: the sharp knock at the door, the way Max growled low in his throat, the sheer panic in Ashley's eyes as we both realized who was on the other side. Tyler. When I yanked open the door, I wasn't prepared for what I saw. Tyler stood there, drenched from the rain that had started pouring outside, his face twisted into something between a sneer and a smirk. But it was his eyes that unsettled me the most, wild, unhinged, like he was enjoying every second of this. "You think you can just take her away from me?" he spat, stepping forward. I could see something glinting in his hand, a knife. Small, but deadly enough. Everything happened fast after that. Max lunged at Tyler with a ferocity I'd never seen before, giving me just enough time to tackle him to the ground. The knife clattered across the wooden floor as we struggled. I could feel his fists landing, but adrenaline numbed the pain. All I could think about was ending this. Ashley screamed in the background, but I tuned her out. She'd made her choices. This was mine. Eventually, I pinned Tyler down, breathing hard, my fists aching from the blows I'd delivered. The kid was tougher than he looked, but rage had given me the edge. I grabbed the knife, tossing it far across the room, out of reach. Ashley finally snapped out of her daze and called the cops. They arrived minutes later, sirens slicing through the night air. Tyler was arrested on the spot, cuffed and dragged out of the cabin, still screaming about how Ashley was his, and how I'd ruined everything. It was like something out of a bad thriller, only this was real. As the cops pulled away, leaving behind nothing but flashing red and blue lights, I turned to Ashley, and for the first time, I saw her clearly, not as the woman I'd loved for 15 years, but as the stranger she'd become. "This is it, Ashley," I said quietly, my voice steady. "I don't ever want to see you again." She didn't argue. She just nodded, tears streaming down her face. But I didn't care. Whatever guilt or sympathy I might have felt was long gone. She was a chapter I'd finally closed. Fast forward to now, life is different. I sold the house. Too many memories, too many ghosts. I got a place downtown, closer to work, closer to the life I should have been living all along. Max adjusted faster than I did, making new friends at the dog park and giving me a reason to smile on the hardest days. And then there was Samantha. After everything with Ashley settled, I reached out to her. At first, it was just to catch up, to reconnect with someone from my past who hadn't betrayed me. But the more we talked, the more I realized something. She saw me. The real me. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid of being seen. We've been seeing each other for a few months now. It's slow, easy, nothing like the whirlwind that was my relationship with Ashley. And that's exactly what I need. Looking back, I learned more from this mess than I ever expected. Betrayal cuts deep, but it also forces you to face truths you've been avoiding. I learned to trust my gut, to value honesty over comfort, and most importantly, to let go of people who don't deserve a place in my life. If you're reading this and you're in the middle of your own storm, here's my advice: don't ignore the signs. Don't cling to something just because it's familiar. And when the time comes, don't be afraid to walk away, because sometimes, the end of one story is just the beginning of a better one.